All right, welcome everyone. Welcome to the Beauj Box 2026 6.0. This is, believe it or not, sixth iteration of Beauj Box. One of my favorite things that we do here at 6 Foot Wine Club. It's an annual thing for those of you who are joining us for the first time. It is kind of an annual bonus add-on box besides the monthly kind of subscription box that we put together. But it's always fun just because it's just there are 10 crews, and we'll go into what crew means exactly, but there are 10 crews in Beaujolais, and then there's two generic regional appellations. So there's a Beaujolais and Beaujolais Village. So it kind of neatly breaks into 12 wines, which is one case of wine, so hence the name Beauj Box. So it's 12 wines over 12 weeks. And everything is the same grape variety. So we're talking about one grape variety, Gamay, and then we're going to talk about all these different ways how the soil type makes a difference, climate makes a difference, elevation, exposition, winemaking process. How it's really a fun way to kind of geek out on wine, and how all these different factors essentially influence the final stylistic expression of the wine. So not only is Beaujolais delicious and just really fun and joy to drink, but this is a really good way to really geek out for those of you who really want to learn more about kind of winemaking and Beaujolais as well, but particularly just winemaking in general. So that's how I put it together in the very first year, and it's always been a very popular thing that we do. So here we are, 2026, 6.0, Beauj Box 6.0. So sixth time of doing it. So this year, again, all 12 bottles in a box, and then we're going to do very traditional classic breakdown of Beaujolais, which is grapes can come from anywhere within Beaujolais, Beaujolais Village, which is a particular part of Beaujolais, and then each one of the 10 crus, and we're going to drink one bottle from each one of those over the next 12 weeks. Every fourth one is going to be a Zoom tasting, actual live tasting. In between, you're going to get a recording on a Friday, like what I'm doing right now. But every fourth one, so at the end of each month, we're going to have a live Zoom tasting where you get to, you can drink it all together. And then you can ask any questions you may have from the previous three that you tasted from that month. And then we'll go on and so forth. So yeah, super fun. This is an area, if you ever look at Beaujolais, it's a very small area. It's about 45 miles in length, about 7 to 10 miles wide. So small area. For those of you who are in DC area, DMV area, it's basically distance between DC and Baltimore. And imagine that distance, only 7 to 10 miles wide. And then there's just specific crus in different areas that stylistically wines are very different from crew to crew. So imagine how fun that would be, kind of going through that corridor, 95 corridor, and tasting wines from different regions between that. So that's kind of how it is. And also another reason why Beaujolais is always a kind of a special place in my heart is, one, for those of you, and most of you have been around 6 Foot Wine Club for a long time, but for those of you who are joining Beauj Box for the first time, so 6 Foot Wine Club is built on basically two principles: community building and drinking natural wine, or building community through natural wine. And this natural wine movement, this modern day natural wine movement, really started right here in Beaujolais. So in case you're not familiar with that term, natural wine, there's no real industry-wide definition of what a natural wine is. But you might have heard things like minimal interventionist wine that's used interchangeably, a very similar thing. I personally don't even like to use the word natural wine anymore, because what does it mean? It doesn't mean anything, because it means different things for different people. But for me, that minimal interventionist wine means something more to me these days. But the idea is that we have this romantic idea of what wine is, which is, people snap on grapes, you ferment it, you put it in a box, I put it in a bottle, and you sell it off, right? But the majority of the wine, a vast majority, we're talking like 95% and above of the wine produced in the world, is made nothing like that. It's just like any other big agro business, agro product. agricultural product that is highly engineered, highly manipulated, a lot of intervention going in essentially to kind of tweak the product into fit the certain flavor profile that has been tested to be favorable to the final consuming public. So yeah, that's kind of the vast majority of what the wines are. And then for in right around 60s, 70s, 80s, really it's the 60s and 70s. 70 was kind of the big moment here in Beaujolais, where a lot of producers essentially said the problem with not only with the conventional wine, which are those kind of manipulated wines, is that not only are they bad for the environment, right? Because they're usually made with a lot of pesticides and chemicals in the field, farmed with a lot of that. And then even in the cellar, there are up to 70 to 90 different additives depending on where you are. US allows about up to 90 different additives. Europe, EU allows about 70 different additives in the winemaking process, and those are completely legal for you to add. And you also don't have to disclose any of it. If you ever notice, there's no nutritional label on wine, and the winemakers and wine industry doesn't have to disclose how they made it and what went into it. And let me tell you, none of that is by accident. So not only is it bad, perhaps, or it's kind of hiding, it kind of looks sketch, right? You're not knowing as a consumer, not knowing what you're exactly putting into your body, but really, even just for the wine themselves, they just became very homogenous. Everything tastes exactly the same across the board. Everybody's chasing the same kind of flavor profile that does well in the market, and then they're tweaking the wines to taste more and more like that. And it just became really boring. So in the 70s, there were these 4 winemakers here in Beaujolais. And then, by the way, there were a lot more than just these 4, but these 4 kind of became the face of the movement because these were the 4 Beaujolais producers that eponymous American importer by the name Kermit Lynch started importing into US. And by the way, I mean, without that, all the Beaujolais we know of right now is because of the work of Kermit Lynch, the good Beaujolais, I should say. There's all the, George Duboeuf, Beaujolais gets a really bad rap in this country, and rightfully so, because all the bullshit Beaujolais Nouveau that George Duboeuf makes, it's everywhere, it saturates the market. But the really quality, good Beaujolais started coming in because of importers like Kermit Lynch. So these 4 people, amongst many, essentially started going backwards. They said, you know what, the hell with this industrial, conventional winemaking where everything tastes the same, everything is chemically treated in the field and then made very, intervened so much in the cellar that everything tastes exactly the same. And they want to go back to the way their great-grandfathers used to make wine. They want to go back to the way before all this industrial revolution and just this interventionist approach to winemaking happened. What does that mean? So it's essentially people, they started using native yeast instead of pitched yeast. So in conventional winemaking, oftentimes you order yeast strains from this book, like a catalog, yeast catalog, about this thick. And then, these different yeast strains, they have names like N31S2, yeast strains S6, XYZ. And then it will give off like flavors and aromas of cocoa nibs or passion fruit or things like that. So it's a way of manipulating the wine to get it to smell and taste the way you want. Instead of that, they said, we're only going to use native yeast, the yeast that's found on the skins of the grapes, and we're not going to add any other yeast. We're not going to pitch it. We're not going to inoculate with any other yeast. We're just going to be purely fermented with only the yeast that's found on the skins. And in order for you to do that, you just have to farm really carefully, and oftentimes it has to be organic. It has to be chemical free, because without that, if you're spraying the field too much, essentially you're killing off all the yeast cells in the vineyard. So in order to keep the yeast population healthy and plentiful, you have to farm organically or as little with the chemical intervention as possible in the field. So native yeast in the cellar, not much chemicals or no chemicals in the field, And at the time, this winemaking procedure called chaptalization was legal, and is still legal in Beaujolais, by the way. And many parts of the world, it's actually still legal, where you actually can add sugar to the grape must, which is the crushed grape before it ferments, the juice essentially, to jack up the alcohol percentage. And they say we're not gonna chaptalize our must, and then they refuse to filter. A lot of wines that we drink in the world are filtered and fined. Filtering is a physical way of removing particles out of the wine, right? Like a filter, like you pour something and on the other side something comes out, and then fining is a chemical way of removing stuff. Oftentimes you fine wines to remove protein that's left over after fermentation, because that's what makes the wine a little bit cloudy. And people, we've been taught that cloudy wines are fucked up wines, but the truth is, for the majority of human history, we have been drinking cloudy wines because they haven't not been filtered or fined. They're perfectly fine wines. And oftentimes with the filtering and fining, you're also removing a lot of kind of core essence and extra layers of flavors, textures, and aromas that you could possibly experience. So based on these things, native yeast fermentation, refusal to chaptalize, refuse to filter and fine. These things are kind of like the tenets, the core of what these natural wine makers started deploying in their field and as well as cellar, starting right here in Beaujolais. And then that really caught on by these, young sommeliers in Paris who started buying their wines, started selling it in their natural wine bars, which by the way still exist, and they're super fun in Paris if you ever go there. And then it really caught on, and it started kind of exporting to the moving outside, and then now not this natural wine movement has kind of become a global phenomenon. So all of that started right here in Beaujolais because a group of winemakers here decided that they're gonna say enough is enough. We're not gonna make wine in that way. We're gonna go back the way it used to be. Kind of our romantic idea of what wine is supposed to be, right? That stomp the grapes, let it ferment, and just bottle it and sell it off. Nothing added, nothing subtracted. Just let the grapes be the wines that they want to become. Just put up the guardrail so it doesn't become vinegar. But outside of that, we're not gonna fuck with it so much, right? It's like if you are into cooking, Italian cooking, it's like to get the best ingredients you possibly can and try not to fuck it up. Try to do as little as possible, eat seasonally, what's in season, what's in peak flavors, and do as little as possible to it. It's kind of the same idea. Grow and farm that as good of grapes and fruits that you possibly can, and in the cellar, do as little possible. Don't fuck it up, essentially, is the whole idea behind these kind of natural wines. So it all started right here. So this is a special place for me. Not only with that, as a somebody who's been working in natural wine for a long time, and then who founded the wine club based on natural wine. Without the kind of work and then these kind of wines that started from here, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing now. So special place. By the way, I forgot to mention those four guys' names. This is very, very French, but it's actually Marcel Lapierre, Jean Foillard, Guy Breton, and Jean-Paul Thévenet. Those are the four guys, a gang of four. If you become a Beaujolais fan, you'll probably hear those names, the gang of four, and those names quite a bit. And we feature every one of those people on Beauj Box in the past years. This year we don't have them in the box because we featured all of them before. I try not to repeat the same producers. We had to do a couple of them, but different, or some of them we haven't featured in a long time. Some of them is a different crew that they also produce. But yeah, I try my best not to repeat producers. But yeah, so just know that those are those four. But at the end of the day, honestly, Beaujolais is just delicious. I mean, it's a crowd pleaser anytime you have friends over and you don't know exactly what to open. Beaujolais will almost always be a good bet because it's just delicious. It's just, at the end of the day, wine can be really intellectual, cerebral, and all of that, but it really just gets you back to the basic, which is the joy of drinking. And to me, Beaujolais is exactly that. It's just fun, delicious, and it's always fun to drink. So anyways, that's why I put together a Beauj Box every year, and that's why I'm doing it for the 6th time. So here we are. All right, so let's talk about where we are real quick. We started talking about it. So we're obviously in France. We're in this little part called Beaujolais. You will all have access to these files and maps and soil maps and different things. I will also probably be sending them out, or at least I'll send them a link to where you can find all these maps and different files for each recording. But one of them is the wine map of France. So if you look at it, there's Paris up on kind of like center northern part by Champagne, or the purple part, right? If you go southeast of Paris, following the Yonne River, it kind of takes you into Burgundy, which is that kind of like magenta, purple, pink area. So southern tip of that Burgundy is Beaujolais. That light pink area just northwest of Lyon is where we are. So it's close to Rhone, right? It's also close to Loire, eastern end of Loire Valley, and then it's the southern tip of Burgundy, and that little pink region is essentially where we are, and that's where we're going to spend the next 12 weeks. So even just looking at the whole entire map of France, you can see what a small kind of a wine making region it is, and then we're going to spend 12 weeks really diving deep into that, which is always fun. So let's see, they're both red, all three, the red, white, rosé wines are all made here and legally allowed. Also, there's some sparklings that are being made. There's a lot of also like young producers who don't really give a shit about putting Beaujolais or Beaujolais Village or any kind of like appellation titles on there, or classifications on their label. So they just go make whatever wines they want to make with the grapes they can get their hands on, and then just classify it under Vin de France, which is the national, grapes can come from anywhere within France. But because they don't care about these classifications, they just know that wines are fun, their wines are good, and they don't care whether it's called Beaujolais, Beaujolais Village, or any of the crus. But in each one of these crus and Beaujolais, for the actual, if you see this bottle that we're drinking today is actually Beaujolais. By the way, this is what we're tasting today. Starting off, sorry, I should have probably said that at the very beginning, which is 2023 Famille Chasselay. Beaujolais is not dead. Beaujolais is what we're tasting today. Kind of fun little, very rebellious kind of a label. And then you're gonna hear a lot about that, particularly here in Beaujolais. There's a lot of kind of like a, middle finger to the establishment, like fuck you, we're gonna do our own thing kind of attitude that exists here. So this kind of label is always a good a sign that somebody at least gives you a lens into the winemaker's philosophy and kind of their view on the establishment of wine, so to speak. So we talked a little bit about how Burgundy, this is a tip of the Burgundy, and they share actually, it just transitions it from Burgundy into Beaujolais. And back in the days, Beaujolais and Burgundy used to be just one, all in the Burgundy. Beaujolais was not a separate area in Burgundy. It was just a southern tip of, it was part of Burgundy. But as you know, Burgundy is really, when we're talking about Burgundy, we're talking about Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. Those are, there are other grape varieties that are allowed there, but really those are the two that run the game up there, right? The best, some of the most expensive, the best and the most sought after Pinot Noir and Chardonnay are grown in that region. But then, back in the days, Archbishop of Burgundy decided he's going to kick out Gamay, which is what grows in Beaujolais, out of Burgundy, saying these noble grapes of Pinot Noir and Chardonnay do so well here in Burgundy. They represent Burgundy, and this kind of a cousin of a Pinot Noir, kind of a rustic, gamey, more feral cousin of a Pinot Noir called Gamay. Like, it just doesn't produce good enough wine to really belong in Burgundy. So he decided to kick out essentially Beaujolais and Gamay out of Burgundy, and that's how the creation Beaujolais was created outside of Burgundy. But little did he know, the Beaujolais, the southern part where Beaujolais exists, the soil type actually changes. So Burgundy is all about limestone and clay, right? Like limestone is really what defines all the Pinot Noir. Chardonnay gives it that really high acid, angular, lean cut to the wine, a lot of minerality. And then when it comes to Beaujolais here, the soil type changes. Now it becomes a lot more granitic. There's a lot more granite in the soil as well as volcanic soils. And Chardonnay and Pinot Noir don't like that. They don't do very well in granite soil. Or they just do better in limestone. It's not that they don't do very well, but they just do better. The wines that come from there do better. However, Gamay grown on granite turns out to be way better. Gamay does way better in granite. So it actually ended up being a blessing for Beaujolais. Kind of, they were able to create this kind of their own branding around what a Beaujolais can be, because now it's Gamay grown on granite, which is very, very different from Pinot Noir and Chardonnay grown on Burgundy. So that's essentially how it got created. Beaujolais does divide into kind of north and south. So if you look at the second map called Beaujolais, or Beaujolais Cru map, so you see kind of the light pink area called Beaujolais that is on the southern half, southern half, and then kind of runs to the east. And then there's a purple area called Beaujolais Village on the west, starting from the kind of midway point going up north, right? And then you see all the 10 crus from Saint-Amour, Juliana, Chenaz, Moulin à Vent, Chouveau, Fleury, Morgon, Régnier, Côte de Brie, right? By the way, there's a really fun mnemonics. I say this every year, but essentially, some Japanese Canadians marry French Canadians, making really beautiful children. Is essentially pneumatics that I had to memorize 10 crus of Beaujolais. So some Saint-Amour, Japanese Julianas, Canadians Chenaz marry Moulin à Vent, French Fleury, Canadians Chouveau, making Morgon, really Régnier, beautiful Brie, children Côte de Brie. And that's all in order of going from north to south. So in case you ever will get on a game show and I need to name 10 crus of Beaujolais, I probably will never happen, but you never know. If you have to get that, now you can remember this mnemonics to do that. Anyway, so if you look at it, the north and south, southern half is essentially all that pink Beaujolais. The northern half is essentially where, quote unquote, the best, all the 10 crus are essentially, as you can see. And technically, up north is much more prestigious. I mean, wines here are a little more expensive. They're considered more serious and better. I mean, there are obviously also excellent wines coming out of Beaujolais in the south as well. But in general speaking, the north is where it's prized, and south and the Beaujolais is where the kind of regional wines come from. This is also a lot of that where George Deboeuf, kind of a nouveau George Deboeuf wines come from. Because soil types also change. Up north is that granite volcanic soil that I was telling you about, and as you get south more, it gets sandier. The soil is more fertile, and you may think that fertile soil must do better. It's actually the wine grapes do better, or vines grown on an infertile soil, less nutritious soil essentially, make better wines. It's kind of like humans. They just have to kind of suffer, and then they have to dig deep and struggle and then find their ways to nutrients and water, and then it gives them, it lets them produce grapes that are much more characterful and better. So yeah, in the south, in a much more sandier, more fertile soil, you get wines that are quite, fruitful, a lot of fruit, and delicious, but it's a lot more, it lacks concentration and complexity. It's a lot more one note, simpler, kind of fruit driven wine, as opposed to once you go north, you start to see all that kind of difference of soil types. You get a lot more minerality coming in, texturally changes, fruit qualities change. So all of that, it kind of divides into north and south. But for today's purpose, or today's wine, we're in Beaujolais. We're actually in the southern half of Beaujolais, and this is where we're going to start. This is kind of a wine that also, I tasted this, and I was really, really impressed and surprised that this was actually Beaujolais designation. Because not only is it delicious, but it's not just simple. Like, there's a lot going on here. It's a lot more wine than you would think it is coming from Beaujolais. So this just goes to show that not all Beaujolais is worse than Cru Beaujolais. Sometimes regular Beaujolais can be just as delicious, just as good as the rest. It all kind of depends on the kind of the particular site, the soil type, and then of course the winemaker, and how good of a winemaker, how careful and thoughtful of a winemaker they are. Speaking of which, let's talk about who makes this wine. You guys will all get these pictures as well. But first is a picture of the family. So this is a Chasselay family. So going from left to right, so that's Claire, which is a daughter. And then on in the middle is Jean-Gilles, is the dad, to the right of the daughter Claire. And to the right of him is Christian, which is the mother. And then finally, Fabian is the son. So it's a whole family affair. But Fabian, one on the right, the son, the guy, is kind of the winemaker. He does vinify along with Claire. Claire and Fabian work together. They vinify everything together. But Fabian is more in charge of the purely the winemaking and the cellar work. As opposed to Claire also works on the sales and the marketing and the kind of like the business side of it as well. But they, in all honesty, they all kind of work together. It's a true kind of a family business. Chasselay family has been cultivating vines here since 1464. So, there's a record of them cultivating vines here back in 1400s, all written in Latin. So we're talking about like the Roman times. So very long time. They've been here for a very, very long time. Just like imagine the kind of like generational knowledge of the land that would exist, having cultivated, same crop from the same plot of land for that long, And part of the reason probably why they are able to make wines like this from quote unquote lesser of the Beaujolais, the southern half of Beaujolais. But the estate really didn't start bottling their own wine. They were cultivating wines and they're selling these grapes to different co-ops and bigger companies, and they were selling essentially raw material, but they were not bottling their own wines. But it wasn't until in the 80s when Christian and Jean-Gilles, mom and dad, took over, and that's when they started bottling their own wines, and really that's when the Famille Chasselay, the estate, was born. Then in 2000 was another big turning point where the Jean-Gilles and Christian, they decided to convert their entire farming operations into organic and biodynamic, and then decided to vinify with a minimal intervention in the cellar, kind of moving into that natural wine movement style. And you may say, yeah, you just talked about how that all started in the 70s and then they just started in 2000, but you're right. I mean, there's still quite a bit of people yes, natural wine movement, organic farming, all of that is a big thing in Beaujolais, but in majority it's still conventionally farmed, meaning people are still spraying. There's a lot of that still happening here, especially here in southern Beaujolais, southern half, where the industrial farming, all that gigantic co-ops coming in and buying up all the grapes and even leasing lands and growing their own grapes. I mean, this is within Beaujolais. If you're gonna find the biggest concentration of conventional farming, it will be in the southern half. And for a family that are growing grapes here in the southern half, and as early as 2000, for them to convert all of their farming to organic, they were a bit of a pioneers essentially in this area, at least in the southern half, to really turn it into a chemical-free or organic farming. They also cultivate with the greatest kind of respect to biodiversity. I mean, this is something that runs through. You're going to talk a lot about this. You're going to hear a lot about this in Beaujolais with the producers that we're going to feature in the wine Beauj box. But a lot of hedgerows, a lot of flower and row strips and cover crops, different between the rows, basically letting the vines exist amongst other native kind of plantations and weeds. People think of these kind of weeds and different things to be as a bad thing, but a lot of these producers realize having this biodiversity within amongst the vines is actually beneficial to creating this ecosystem that the vines thrive in. So they definitely do not. It's very simple. It's basically zero weed killers, zero synthetic chemicals. They do organic farming, meaning they do use copper and sulfur in certain times. They spray when they're absolutely needed, but in general, no weed killers and no chemicals, synthetic chemicals, as little as possible. Then in 2008 is when basically Claire and Fabian joined the family business. And with their kids' leadership, they were the actual ones who pushed the family to produce wines outside of just Beaujolais. So they started getting in the micro trading program where they're trading some of their grape because they were in the south and with a lot of fruit. So they're exchanging some of that for a little bit of fruit up north in the Cruz. So they started producing wine in Morgon and Côte de Bruy as well. So now they produce wines in different places, all the way from Beaujolais, Côte de Bruy, and all of that push happened because of the kids that came into the picture. Now they farm 13 hectares spread over Beaujolais, Côte de Bruy, and Bruy, like I mentioned. And then they have been certified organic since 2006. They're not certified, but they practice biodynamic farming. So they're very traditional, very kind of organic, finding into that natural wine ethos that I was talking about earlier is pretty much following, subscribing to all of that. By the way, Fabian, the head kind of winemaker, the main winemaker, he trained under Bruno Clavier, which in Vosne-Romanée, which is a very well-known region in Burgundy, within Burgundy. And there he adopted this idea of de-stemming. By the way, Burgundy, I mean, this is a whole different thing that we could get into, but Burgundy Pinot Noir, essentially two big kind of a divide is de-stemming or whole cluster. Some Pinot Noir, some producers swear by whole cluster, meaning when you're fermenting the wines, you include the actual clusters, the vines themselves in the must. And then some people like to de-stem and get rid of that and then just use just the berries and the fruit alone. And then Bruno Chevalier, that he worked Clavier, that he basically mentor under, is a de-stemming guy. He believes in de-stemmed fruit. So he actually uses a lot of that de-stemming here on Gamay here in Beaujolais. So traditionally speaking, and we're going to talk more about this, carbonic maceration, which is used here in Beaujolais, there's pretty much all whole cluster, but he actually likes to de-stem his fruit. So it turns out his style, his wines tend to be a lot more Burgundian in style. And don't worry, in case you're like, what is the Burgundian versus the carbonic? We're going to get into a lot more of that because we actually do have at least two examples of a fully Burgundian, meaning there's no carbonic whatsoever, just fully maceration method, versus semi-carbonic, full carbonic. We're going to get into all of that. So don't worry if you are not catching everything that I'm saying right now, because it will come to you. But yeah, so he de-stems his Gamay instead of traditional 100% whole cluster technique. By the way, he does that with the Cru, but the one that we have today with our Beaujolais, it is a lot more traditional, meaning it is a carbonically macerated. So let's talk about that. What is carbonic maceration and how this wine is made? So this is 100% hand harvested, organically farmed Gamay, 100% Gamay. Think of Gamay as kind of like rustic, more wild cousin of Pinot Noir. But as you'll see over the next 12 weeks, the expression of that could change very widely. It can be from very red fruit, red berry, bright driven to really dark and like black fruit driven. It could be tannic, it could be light, it could be poppy and bright and crunchy with a lot of carbonic maceration. It could be a lot more serious and tannic and deep with a more of that Burgundian maceration method. So yeah, stylistically it ranges quite a bit. It plays quite well depending on how you decide to make wine. But it is the grape of Beaujolais. I mean, Gamay is grown in other places as well. Here in U.S. and Oregon, there's quite a bit of Gamay being grown there, as well as in California. There's Gamay in Loire, there's Gamay in Rhone, there's Gamay grown in different parts of the world, but really the epicenter of Gamay production and the wine is right here in Beaujolais. And a lot of people kind of try to copy. Whenever you make Gamay, you kind of talk about Beaujolais as kind of like the reference point. Just like how whenever you talk about Pinot Noir or where else, you talk about Burgundy as kind of like that reference point, which is both good and bad, you know, you know, in a way. I mean, it's a whole different thing that we can get into, but sometimes I wish there's a world where we can talk about Pinot Noir without talking about Burgundy, and then same thing. I wish there was a world where we can talk about Gamay without talking about Beaujolais. It's kind of like, you know, approaching things with a beginner's mind, with no kind of reference point at all, right? Experiencing it for what it is, but you know, that's what it is. It's human nature, right? To kind of have a standard reference point and then compare everything else based on the life experience of that one reference point. So currently, as right now, this right here, if you ever come across Gamay, you're surely going to hear about Beaujolais. Well, this is kind of like Beaujolais. Well, it's nothing like Beaujolais. You can't really talk about Gamay without talking about Beaujolais. Anyways, so this is 100% hand harvested, organically farmed, Gamay, grown on clay and limestone. So I mentioned earlier how Beaujolais is essentially defined by granite, right? The Burgundy is really where limestone comes out. But here, as you come down more south, not only does it get sandy, but it also, you start to see a lot more limestone, clean limestone, a lot like Burgundy, where the Gamay didn't do so well. Now you taste this and you tell me if the Gamay doesn't do well in limestone and clay. But so a little different from the other granitic soil that you find everywhere else. Also the rest of the southern Beaujolais, you know, a little bit different, a lot more limestone here. This is all spontaneous fermentation, meaning only the native yeast. Whenever you hear the word spontaneous fermentation, just know that there's no yeast pitch. It's just a native yeast that's found on the skins of the grapes. No additives during the whole vinification process except for a touch of sulfites at bottling. So sulfites can be used. Sulfites, you're going to hear it a lot. Every bottle of wine you see in the back is going to say it contains sulfites, because anything that's fermented has sulfites. It's a naturally occurring substance. Cheese, charcuterie, wine, kimchi, sauerkraut, you know, you name it. Anything that's been fermented, beer, essentially has sulfites. It's a naturally occurring substance. What we're talking about is added sulfites. Oftentimes winemakers add sulfites to the wine, and you can also, it's a big decision-making point when to add sulfites. So you can do it as soon as the wine's berries come into the cellar, kind of killing off everything. Sulfites is essentially antiseptic. It kills off everything. All the enzymes, bacteria, it just kind of makes everything sterile. So if you use it too soon, then you're killing off some of the yeast cells, right? Yeast bacteria that you worked so hard in the vineyard to grow. So you don't want to put it before fermentation, really, unless you're going to pitch yeast, unless you're going to inoculate it with the lab-grown yeast. In that case, you want a sterile environment, and you just want sugar present, and so you can use just that. Or you can do it after fermentation is done, before you put it into a aging vessel. So whether it be cement, whether it be barrels, or whether it be bottles, right? You can put some on there, because now the fermentation is done. You don't need all that yeast activity. But when the fermentation is done, doesn't mean the wine is actually done. Like wine is ever so, especially wines, natural wine that I made like this, there's bacteria and microbes present in the wine, and it's constantly evolving and changing. And some winemakers want that, they like that. Some people don't. Some people just want exactly the wines as it is after it's fermented and then be done evolving. So they'll introduce some sulfites to kill off the rest of the enzymes. Oftentimes where you're gonna find sulfites added is right before bottling, just because, you know, a lot of these bottles are, especially if they're being exported, they end up having to travel through the ocean, Atlantic Ocean, coming to the States from Europe. And, you know, once you get there, you don't know what the conditions are going to be like, and they just don't want to take any chances of any microbes or enzymes or bacteria doing something crazy, or going like, you know, starting a second fermentation inside the bottle or anything like that. So they usually put just a little bit of sulfites just at bottling, just kind of stabilize the bottle. But even then, it's a very minute percentage, minute amount. You know, In US and EU, it's a different amount, but I think it's like almost 100 ppm, 100 milligrams per liter is allowed up to that. But oftentimes we're talking about like 5, 10, 15 milligrams added. So even when you add, it's it's a very minute amount. And I don't ever want to also kind of make it sound like adding any sulfites is a terrible thing. I've become a lot more, I guess, a pragmatist. Sometimes the wines are just little right on the cusp. You it may feel like it's gonna fall off, and you got to remember these are people's livelihood. These are, if they lose a vintage, essentially it's a matter of eating or not eating. For some of these people. So are they going to take a risk? Are we going to be such a purist that we're going to judge winemakers for adding little sulfites, before end, just so that they can be sure that the wines that arrive in the U.S. when they ship from France are going to be drinkable and right, and then we're all going to receive the right wines. I don't judge people on that. And quite frankly, some wines I would even argue that sometimes VA, and we're going to talk about fault, on this on the Beauj box as well. These kind of like different elements of wine, volatile acidity, Brett, all these different kind of bacterially caused kind of faults in wine, you could shoot up a little bit during winemaking process because maybe it got a little too hot, maybe it was really warmer summer, winter or spring than expected, and then things start fermenting at a much higher temperature than you wanted, and these things can happen, and to use a little sulfites to kind of calm down the wine, to kill off some of those acidic bacteria and things. Am I the one to really judge them because of that? No. So I don't ever want you to think that sulfites is the devil. But I guess my line is that oftentimes it's excessively used in conventional winemaking as well as winemaking in a lot of U.S. wineries, but as long as it is judiciously, minimally used, just to kind of stabilize the wine, and then also if you do use a lot of it, I think that as long as you're transparent about it, you're saying this is when I added, this is how much I added, I have no problem. At that point, I can make a decision about whether I want to drink that wine or I don't want to drink that wine, or that's what I want to put into my body, or I don't want to put it to the body. So. That's what I'll say about sulfites for now, and I'm sure I'll have a lot more to say afterwards. But yeah, there's that. So all spontaneous fermentation, no additives during the whole vinification process, except for a touch of sulfites at bottling is what this wine is. This is all carbonic maceration for 15 days in Smet. By the way, so carbonic maceration is essentially, so a lot of fermentation we're talking about is a bacterial process. So yeast is a bacteria, right? And then the formula is essentially sugar plus yeast equals alcohol plus CO2. So when yeast eats up sugar, what they do is they pee out alcohol and they fart out CO2. Is essentially what happens. And that's essentially the basis of every booze that we drink. Beer is the sugar source comes from grains, and then yeast eats that, and then it produces alcohol, and then farts out CO2. Why? The sugar source is grapes, and then yeast eats up that sugar, pisses out alcohol, farts out CO2, right? If the sugar source is sugarcane, it's rum. If the sugar source is agave and cactus, then it is a tequila or mezcal, right? If the sugar source is, so you get the idea. Essentially, that is the base formula for all alcoholic beverages that we consume, right? So what happens is you get the grapes into the cellar, you stomp it, or you press it so you get the juice, and then you let the yeast found on the skins to start working its way with the sugar in the solution, and it turns into wine, and then it farts out CO2. But what happens in a carbonic maceration is a different way of starting a fermentation. What they do is that they bring in the grapes, usually in a whole bunch, whole cluster, with the stems still included, and then they gently kind of stack them on top of each other in a tank. It can be stainless steel tank, it could be cement. In this case, it was cement. Everything is done in cement here. And then you can put a blanket of CO2 on top, and then you cap it. So this essentially the berries are, and the CO2 is a little bit heavier than oxygen. So the oxygen all gets pushed out, CO2 settles, and then the entire berries inside the tank are in an anaerobic environment, meaning lack of oxygen, right? It's just under CO2. There's no contact to oxygen. And when that happens, the fermentation is not a bacterial fermentation. It doesn't start with the yeast eating up the sugar. What it starts is this is a mouthful, intracellular enzymatic fermentation, meaning all these enzymes from the inside the berries enzymatically start fermenting and converting sugar into alcohol, and then all the CO2 buildup from the fermentation inside the berries pops the skins of the berry, juice flows out, and then the bacterial fermentation with the yeast starts. And then more CO2 is produced, which gives it even more, it keeps it under anaerobic. So that's carbonic maceration. And there's also, you're gonna hear semi-carbonic here, that's a full carbonic. And then you're gonna hear semi-carbonic, which is you do the same thing, whole cluster, you stack it inside the berries, but instead of putting CO2 into the tank, in the vessel, you just leave it. So the up top is still exposed to oxygen, and the bottom, from the weight of the berries being crushed from all the berries on top, a lot of the juice will start fermenting because it comes in contact with the skins, yeast on the skins. CO2 is produced, CO2 pushes the oxygen up, so eventually it goes up. So the top half, or half, third, or whatever, I don't know exactly where, depending on how tall you stack it and whatnot, right? So the portion of it is going to go through carbonic, right? Because the CO2 is going to continue to build, because all the wine, the juice on the bottom of the tank is fermenting with the yeast producing CO2. CO2 is pushing oxygen out. So some of it is going to be carbonically macerated. Some of it on the bottom is going to be bacterial fermentation. So that's called semi-carbonic. And then of course there's a Burgundian maceration method, which is that you don't do any of it. You just crush the whole thing. Everything just goes into a tank, and everything is a bacterial yeast fermentation. So those are all three different kind of ways of fermenting wines that are commonly practiced here in Beaujolais, and we have examples of all three of those in this box. So again, this is one of those factors that we're going to talk about, and then you'll be able to tell the difference between, hopefully by the end of the Beauj box, you'll be able to say, I actually prefer maturation method, I prefer semi-carbonic, I prefer full carbonic. All different. The full carbonic essentially gives off a little bit of almost like bubble gum. You're going to hear this descriptor a lot, high toned, which is like the fruit characters that are like little candied. So like peach ring is very different from like actual fruit peach, right? So you're gonna get things like that. You may even hear banana, because a lot of ester comes out when you do carbonic maceration. So it gets very bubblegummy, bright, way less tannin, because it whole point of doing carbonic maceration is to limit the extraction of phenolic compounds, so tannins, color, and all of that. So color tends to be much brighter, lighter. Flavor profile tends to be a lot red berry driven, poppier, brighter. Even fruit characters, again, like I said, high tone, that kind of confectionery, candied, kind of almost like a artificial kind of a flavor. So lighter, brighter, just like easy to drink kind of thing. A lot of Beaujolais Nouveau is made using carbonic maceration. Traditionally, a lot of these cru Beaujolais, especially most of the cru Beaujolais that we feature today in this box, is going to be semi-carbonic. So you're going to have some elements of that carbonic maceration, but you're also going to have the bacterial maceration. And then the Burgundian method is just like the way most red wines are made in the world. So it all kind of depends on what you want and what you like. Obviously, more you go towards a Burgundian method, the fruit character is going to be darker, blacker. It's going to be deeper. It's not as bright and crunchy and light. So again, it's not that one is better than the other. It all depends on what the preference and what the aim of the winemaker is. So, anyways, so yeah, 100% Gamay, Goron, cutting limestone, all spontaneous. No addition except for a touch of sulfites and bottling. This is a carbonically macerated for 15 days in cement. No filtering, no fining, and that's what we have here. All right, let's taste the wine. I'm not going to go through each one of these in case you have, for those of you who are joining us for the first time. We taste the wine through the grid. You will have access to this. This is a WSET Level 3 systematic approach to tasting wine. I will actually go through this in the interest of time. I just realized that this recording is getting a little bit longer than I would have liked. So I'm gonna explain how to taste through all this next week in the next recording. But at least you'll be able to see what I follow. But it's basically, this is a way us, the wine professionals, sommeliers, people are taught how to taste wine. But it's remember, this is all in an exam setting, with the aim of it being a blind tasting, to be able to tell what's in the glass. So it's a kind of a way to help you systematically taste, break down what's in that glass. And then it's 4 parts: appearance, nose, what it looks like, what it smells like; palate, what it tastes like; and then conclusion. And then you kind of put all the information together and then call what the wine is, or how long, the ageability, quality level, and things like that. We use level 3, but there's level 2, level 4, level 1. There's also Court of Master Sommeliers, which is the other big certification body of wine professionals. They have the similar, pretty much exactly the same structure, but just a slight differences here and there. But general idea of this appearance, nose, palate, and the conclusion is the same. I'll go much more deeper into the details of each one of these kind of appearance, nose, palate, and conclusion next week. But for now, let's taste the wine through the grid. All right. Appearance, clarity. This wine is not completely clear, right? Like, you can kind of tell that this wine has not been filtered or fine, right? Like, and this is Beaujolais. I mean, this is natural Beaujolais. So yeah, I'm gonna say this wine is a little bit hazy. Definitely, you can tell this is not a filter or fine wine. When the wine gets filtered and fine, it gets like translucent. Like, really, you can like see through it. I mean, sometimes the color is so high that you cannot read through it, but at least you can see that it is not a translucent wine. Intensity. I'm gonna call this about medium. My lighting is not the best, but yeah, I'm gonna call this about medium deep. Color-wise, I'm gonna call this ruby. There's a little bit of like a bluish hue to it for me, like a purplish bluish hue, but in general, I'm still gonna call this ruby. Other observation, no sediments, no bubbles. Yeah, that's what we got. Let's get to the nose. Okay, I'm gonna say this now. By the way, this wine, when you first open it, is very reductive, meaning wines that are made in a lack of like oxygen, without any kind of oxidative. So oxidative is a presence of oxygen. Reductive is a lack of oxygen. So they're opposite of each other. So when the wines are made in this kind of reductive way, the wines give off this kind of farty, like it's almost like hard-boiled eggs, volcano, like that sulfuric kind of like a farty kind of a thing. When it's really bad, it can smell like an onion skin, but it has some of that. It blew off quite a bit, but I definitely recommend, if you just open this, definitely recommend decanting it. All it is, it just needs oxygen to kind of let it breathe, get rid of that reduction, Yeah, reduction. The beautiful thing about reduction is that if you don't like it, some of it sometimes you know it's actually not a bad thing. Like Chablis, in case a lot of Chablis is reductive, but it kind of comes off as like a almost like it lifts up the minerality in the wine. But if the wine seems really farty and just kind of like a reductive, you can just let it either sit in the glass, swirl it for a long time, or you can decant it. All it needs is some oxygen. So I'm gonna say this wine is sound, but this wine is not clean, right? Like, and we're gonna talk about this quite a bit throughout Beauj box, but this wine is not clean. You can tell this is not like a squeaky clean, stainless steel, made in a lab kind of wine. Like, there's a lot going on here. I'm going as far as a faulty, and then we're gonna talk about fault in another week. But I won't call this wine faulty, but there's a little bit of an elevated Brett, which is, there's a particular yeast strain called Brettanomyces. When that is introduced, or that gets a little bit high, the wine gets a little bit of this kind of like barnyardy, horse's ass, like, you know, if you ever go like horseback riding, imagine like taking the saddle off and like smelling the back of that saddle. I know that's probably a very appealing kind of a picture, but you know, imagine that kind of like a gamey, barnyardy thing. That's Brett, and there's definitely some Brett here. But I won't go as far as like that's so high that like I still smell fruit, I still smell flowers. It's just part of the experience. There's a little bit of elevated volatile acidity here. Gives it a little bit of like that balsamic kind of like little bit like a vinegary. Again, not so high that you're like, oh shit, this wine has gone bad, but you get a little bit of that balsamic notes. In certain wine parts of the world, that is kind of even desired, like a lot of Tuscan wines, a lot of Italian wines in general, but particularly Tuscan wines, a lot of Barolo and Piedmont wines as well, has some of the elevated acetic acid, a lot of VA, and I guess some of that here as well. So again, not so high that I'll go as far as calling this faulty, but this wine is not clean. Like, this wine is sound, but not clean is what I'll say on this thing. Intensity. Smell it about here. So it's like a couple inches off. So just like high end of medium, lower end of medium plus is what I'm gonna call this. Oh, sorry, my screen just went blank. Okay, there you go. Oh, what's going on here? Sorry, my screen is freaking out. Anyways, yeah, so intensity, right around there. So a couple inches, high end of medium, low end of medium plus. Probably, I actually opened mine yesterday, so mine's been open for 24 hours, and then it's smelling much better, way less reductive, so I definitely recommend decanting. Yeah, but I'm gonna call this about medium. Yeah, I'm gonna go with the medium right now. It's not far enough for me to call medium plus, but medium intense aromas of, what do I get? So you go to the second page. I do get some violet here. I just get some blue flower, which is a very common thing with Gamay. Green fruit. Not much green fruit here. No citrus, no stone, no tropical. Red fruit, black fruit. To me, this is mostly black fruit. For the fruit quality here, it gets a little bit blacker and darker. Yeah, fruit is darker. I'm talking about a little like black cherry, little blackberry, little plum too. Maybe you like, if you want to go a little red fruit, like a little brambly. There's that like a black raspberry things that go on. If you ever had black raspberry, like that's a thing. But yeah, I guess some of that here as well. Quality of the fruit, really fresh, really ripe. Nothing really underripe about this, really fresh. Yeah, I don't know why I keep tasting it because I just want to keep drinking it. I know we're on the nose. But yeah, to me, the fruit quality is much darker and blacker. And this is what I'm talking about. Like, even when you are in Southern Beaujolais, especially with the carbonic maceration, a lot of times these wines tend to be a lot more red fruit driven, light and bright. And then don't get me wrong, there's brightness here. There's a lot of lift to the wine, but the fruit quality is dark. And a lot of that is, I don't know this for sure, but I'm willing to bet that he, because we talked about Fabian trained in Beaujolais under a destemming guy, he destemmed some of this stuff. There's probably some whole cluster here as well, because I do get some carbonic stuff here, but there's a lot of destemmed, kind of a real juicy, dark fruit here that only comes from kind of like not having passed through all of that stems and all of that, like spending more time on the skins themselves, which the destemmed fruit normally would do. So the quality of the character of the fruit tends to be darker, blacker, and all of that. Herbaceous and herbal, not a whole lot. I mean, maybe you can convince me there's a little bit of like some sort of like a tomato leaf, some sort of like a stemmy kind of thing. Again, I think that's just some of the stem inclusion. This is why I say I think both like some wine makers will actually do this where they layer like cakes. They'll do like whole cluster, destem, whole cluster, destem. If I was willing to bet, I will try to confirm this with the importer. I'm willing to bet that's probably what he did. He probably layered this thing. So, because I get both. I get both of the kind of the Burgundy maceration thing as well as the carbonic. But because of that, there's some of the stem inclusion that was in there. Ends up probably soaking in the carbonic. It usually just jumps out quite a bit, flows out really quickly. That's the whole point of why leaving it a whole bunch. So as the berries pop, the juices kind of flow down. But when you're doing a maceration method, there's a lot more juice that comes out, and then the stems end up being submerged inside the juice while it ferments, and that's where you pick up a lot of that kind of like stemmy, spicy kind of a thing. So there's some of that here. Like, it's not just the juice. I mean, it's mostly all fruit and really juicy, ripe fruit, but I do get a little bit of that kind of stemmy tomato leaf kind of a thing going on here. No spice for me. And then minerality wise, not super minerally, but I do get a little bit of like dusty kind of like, yeah, again, a little bit of like a crushed rock kind of a thing. No secondary, no tertiary. We're talking about very fresh, kind of all primary kind of a thing going on here. All right, palate. Let's taste it. God damn it, this is so good. It's so delicious. Sweetness, wine is dry. Acidity, I'm gonna call this medium plus. I feel it pulling. There's a good amount of acid here, right? Like all that bright, juicy, ripe fruit, yet there's good acid here to keep it really lively and fresh and bright. Tannin. Not super high, but it's there. I'm calling it like medium minus, already medium minus medium. More than I expected, especially if it's like a regional Beaujolais level. Usually you wouldn't find a lot of tannins kind of textural important, but it's there. Lower than medium, higher than medium minus, it's there. Alcohol, I don't know, 12.5, 13. What is this? 13%, which is right down the middle, so medium alcohol. Body, also about medium. It's about 2% milk. Hey, forgot to say this. Shout out to Lindsay Bourne, Rob Meek, for hooking up with this Team Milk tasting onesie that I've been wearing every Beauj box every year. So anyways, here we are. So yeah, it's 2%, and for the new folks, I'll explain that next week. This is about 2% milk, about medium body. Mousse we don't have to talk about. It's not a sparkling wine. Flavor intensity. This is not shy. I mean, very expressive, really delicious. I don't call it a medium plus. The flavor intensity on the palate. Flavor characteristic. I mean, it's everything that we talked about. The flower, there's a beautiful violet. Like there's a beautiful, beautiful, really pretty violet that's running through here. And then I'm still sticking with that black fruit, black cherry, black plum, blackberry. Maybe there's a little bit of brambly, like black raspberry kind of thing going on here, but mostly all black. The fruit is all beautiful, ripe, fresh. I do get a little bit of like the stemmy inclusion, the spiciness. And then also, yeah, I meant to say this on the earlier, but the reason I was thinking about why this is both, I get both the maceration and as well as carbonic is because the fruit character. I do get the actual fruit, the pureness of the fruit, but some of this fruit is like a little bit candied, right? Like that high tone that I was telling you about. There's a little bit of that, like, I don't know, if you were to get like a blackberry candy, like hard candy, there's some of that thing going on here as well. So it's not just the it's not just the fresh fruit. Yeah, herbaceous, then a little bit of stemmy, kind of a like spicy stemmy thing. No spice. I still do get that kind of dusty, kind of a crushed rock kind of thing. There's also a touch of a salinity here. This wine has a little bit of like a salty kind of thing that balances out all that beautiful fruit as well. So a very different thing. And this is one thing that I only mentioned earlier when we were talking about condition, but that bready kind of like gamey, meaty, barnyard, farmyard kind of thing, that rusticity to the wine, as well as a balsamic vinegar, the left VA. Again, not whole lot, not like enough to like call this faulty. So faulty is essentially what I would call is overwhelming, that you cannot experience other things because it's so overwhelming. But to me, it's just enough to give it personality. It makes this wine, all that breadth and VA makes this wine feel like rustic and wild and feral. Also that like the balsamic vinegar actually gives a lift. I think it makes this wine come out feeling brighter, or crunchy and brighter. And then the bread just gives a whole like a layer dimension to the complexity, which is also counterbalance to all the really ripe fruit that this wine has. So I personally really enjoy it. I think that I would not call this a fault, but you know, people also have different tolerance point. Some people have really low tolerance for VA, and to them, like any little VA, they're like, oh my god, I can't drink this wine. And same thing with the bread. So you have to decide your kind of like a threshold and tolerance point. But a lot of fault, and we'll talk more about fault as time goes on, is really all about winemaker's intention. Like, did he intend to have these things in there? And two, the amount of it. It's really about personal tolerance. It's not really, you know, they say, if at any point somebody says, you know, with some wines, I can say any trace amount of it is fault. But to me, knowing back, like I said, in certain parts of Italian wines, that bready or that VA is almost expected and almost desired. Like that tells me that the VA itself does not make the wine faulty, right? It all depends on the threshold. It depends on the tradition. It depends on preference, you know. So to me, this is not a fault. This is exactly how rustic, kind of like to me, this is, if I ever went to, I expect like if I went to Beaujolais and I was sat in like a French bistro, roadside bistro in a little town in Beaujolais, this would be the kind of things that would be served in a craft, like as a house wine, like a local wine, and I'll be fucking stoked to drink something like this. Like it was just made, like done fermenting like yesterday, or like a couple months ago, or like less than a mile down the road, made by somebody in their garage. And like to me, it's got so much of that kind of like the rustic, real, honest, raw energy about this wine, and that's what I love about it. And the fact that like you can get some of that like stemmy spiciness, some of the minerality, some of that bread, and then VA kind of a complexity, as well as the salinity. Texturally, there's some tannin in here as well. All that at a regional entry point Beaujolais wine is fantastic. I mean, this is a really, really well made Beaujolais. Yeah. Oh, and then finally the finish on the palate. How long do the flavors stick around? Oh, this goes on. Yeah, it's got that beautiful fruit, and then the pretty violet kind of lingers through. The salinity kicks in. All that kind of bread lingers around. I'm gonna call this a medium plus on the finish. All right, conclusion. Quality level, function of four things: balance, intensity, complexity, and the length. This wine is balanced. You may argue that the VA and the bread is out of balance, but to me, I can still talk about fruit, I can still talk about flour, I can talk about all these different elements without then overpowering it. So to me, this wine is balanced. 2, intensity. We called it medium plus on the nose, or medium, low end of high end of medium, low end of medium plus on the nose, but medium plus on the palate. So somewhere between medium and medium plus, right? And then that's intensity. Complexity. We had no secondary, no tertiary, but we had a whole bunch of things in primary, right? We had flour, we had the fruit, 2 different kind of characters of fruit, both the fresh as well as high tone. We had some leafy kind of like herbaceousness. So we had some crushed rocks, right? We also have some bread with some VA, all those things. So I'm gonna call that at least medium. No secondary, no tertiary, but quite a bit of things in the primary. So at least medium. And then the length, we call it medium plus. So if you take average of those 4 things, balanced, medium to medium plus intensity, medium complexity, and a medium plus length. When you take average of those to all that, we're landing somewhere between medium and medium plus, but closer to medium plus, and then being generous, I'm gonna call this very good. And if you or to call this good, I think that's perfectly acceptable. That's perfectly fine, and especially if you just open this. Like I said, I opened mine yesterday, so I'm drinking this on the second day, and it's drinking a lot better. So I highly recommend you decant it and retaste it and think what you think that is. Level of redness, potential for aging. In order to age, you gotta have acid and or tannin. This has good acid, medium plus, we called it, right? Not much tannin, right? Like medium minus is what we called it, right? Medium minus to medium. There's good of intensity, more on the palate than it is on the nose. But yeah, so intensity wise, it's decent. And then complexity, with all the primary different things. So in the end of the day, it has a decent backbone, decent intensity, but nothing crazy. I don't think this wine is meant to be aged for a long time, and oftentimes Beaujolais is not meant to be aged for a long time. So I would say drink this now. I think this wine is drinking beautifully. It's fresh, it's youthful, it's a joy to drink, it's fun, right? This thing makes me smile. But I don't think this is gonna fall apart anytime soon because it's got that good acid. It's got plenty of intensity. I would say enjoy this over the next 3 to 5 years, but I probably wouldn't lay it down for something for a long-term aging. It's not one of those. It's not what this meant to be. Having said that, this as a Beaujolais regional kind of a bottling, this is a fantastic Beaujolais. This drinks more like a cru Beaujolais than it does a regional Beaujolais. So I give high props to this producer for producing something like this in Beaujolais, in southern half of Beaujolais. And this is not the typical, probably entry level Beaujolais you're gonna find out there, but nonetheless, again, goes to showcase or say that not all Beaujolais has to suck. Just because Beaujolais, cru Beaujolais is what everybody's after does not mean the regional Beaujolais has to suck. And this is an example of that. This is very, very delicious, very, very well made one. Now, if anybody wants to play everybody's favorite game, which is guessing how much this wine costs in the retail, you can pause the video right now and then you can come back to it. But this in the retail store would cost $35. So not the cheapest entry level Beaujolais. This is actually even more expensive than some of the cru Beaujolais that we have in this spot. But given the quality, like I said, this drinks more like cru Beaujolais than regular Beaujolais. I think it's more than justifies its price tag. But yeah, it's $35 in the retail shop, and there's that. All right, cool. This recording went way longer than I expected. Usually the first one is longer, but it's not this long. But I don't know. I guess I got a little carried away this week. But anyways, you're gonna get a recording like this every Friday moving forward. Every fourth one being a live one, so you can pop on Zoom at 8:30, and you'll get a link for that as well. But in the meantime, if you have any questions, if you have any concerns, disagreements, you know where to reach me. So cool. Well, enjoy the rest of your weekend, and I will see you all next week. Toodles.